Welcome back.
We rejoin the international climate effort with humility and with ambition. Humility in knowing that today, no country and no continent is getting the job done. But also with ambition, knowing that Paris alone will not do what science tells us we must do together.
When Special Envoy John Kerry signed the Paris Agreement in 2016, he brought his granddaughter to the United Nations with him. We cannot be together today, but we can all reflect on our responsibilities to future generations. The Paris Agreement is our pact with our descendants and the whole human family. This is the race of our lifetimes. We must go much faster and much further. It is within our power to build a future of renewable energy and green infrastructure that protects people and planet and ensures prosperity for all.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the United Nations Association of Westchester for its annual UN Day celebration. It's actually the 76th anniversary of the United Nations. I am Yana Edwards, proud president of the UNA Westchester. You can see from that video that the United States has re-engaged with the work of the United Nations and is none too soon. I'm excited about this year's focus on the impacts of climate change and highlighting the ways local community members are working toward a solution. As our title emphasizes, there's no time for Plan B on this issue. It is urgent. And I sincerely hope that by the end of today's program, you will be inspired and want to get involved in solutions if you're not already. In 2015, 193 countries came together at the United Nations to adopt and commit to long-term comprehensive strategy to tackle the world's greatest challenges related to global sustainable development. The results was the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, a list of 17 goals to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all by 2030. While each goal matters on its own, they all interconnect, incorporating social, economic, and environmental sustainability. Climate action is goal 13. And it's imperative that we continue to recognize how climate change is disrupting national economies and affecting lives and livelihoods, especially for the most vulnerable. This past August, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a major report concluding that the world has already experienced devastating, even irreversible impacts of climate change. The IPCC is a scientific body convened by the United Nations, and their report fortunately showed that there is still a narrow window to keep the devastation from getting even worse. Today, we have two choices: sit back and watch extreme droughts, severe heat wave, catastrophic downpours and flooding, displaced communities, exacerbated global disease, and extinction of entire species, or learn, get involved, and do something about it. The time is now, and the call to action on climate change is clear. We must work as individuals and within our communities, cities, and schools, and it's not just for us, but for our children, our children's children, and their children. A lot of thought and work has gone into the planning of today's program. Thank you to the program committee, Colleen Gaddafi, Nicole Butterfield, her co-chair, Marcia Brewster, Dan Benner, Lily Schindler, Raina Cadaval, and Paul Persidue. I want to thank Martina Dolan, head of the climate team at the United Nations Department of Global Communications, and to all the other climate activists who are part of the dialogue led by our young professional leaders. All participants are welcome to write questions and comments in the chat function. We will have a question and answer following the keynote speaker and each of the dialogues. Please note that the session will be recorded. Also, if some of you want to continue the conversation after the closing of the meeting at 4:30, we will leave the meeting open until 5. Finally, I am grateful for the support of our co-sponsors, the Federation Conservation of Westchester County and Sustainable Westchester. These two organizations are leading the climate action battle in Westchester County. Before I turn the program over to our moderator, I'd like to urge you, if you are not already a member of UNA USA Westchester, to join at the end of the program. We will provide you with the URL for the website and enable you to join easily and quickly. Now I'd like to turn this over to Marsha Brewster, UNA USA Westchester's Vice President. Marsha, please take it over.
You're on mute, Marsha.
Sorry, everybody. Thank you very much, Iana, and welcome everyone to our UNDA program for 2021. As a former staff member of the United Nations who used to cover the crucial issues of water and sanitation, gender equality, and sustainable development, I am very much attuned to the need for multilateral approach to something as threatening to the planet's future as the climate crisis, which affects all areas covered by the Sustainable Development Goals. Aside from the battle in the US Congress, it seems that the United States is back in the climate change dialogue and will be sending a high-level delegation led by President Biden and Envoy John Kerry to the talks in Glasgow next week. The world cannot lose the war against climate change. We cannot let down our children and grandchildren. The choice is clear. We need global action to tame global warming or face apocalyptic consequences. Today, for UNA Westchester's celebration of the 76th anniversary of UN Day, we have inspiring speakers and activists who are leading the battle to build resilience, and reduce extreme climate events before we reach that apocalypse. Much is being done at the international level as well as in Westchester County and by individual activists. Our exciting program highlights crucial actions and gives us ideas on how we can work together. Please take a look at the bioinformation for each of the speakers and moderators on our website, www.unawestchester.org. At this point, I would like to recognize some of the distinguished people we have in the room, and that includes Mayor Sean Patterson Howard of Mount Vernon and our county legislator, Mary Jane Shimsky. Thank you for being our local leaders and leading the fight against climate change. Following the remarks of our keynote speaker from the United Nations, we have 3 dialogues on what we can do to promote climate solutions at the local level, moderated by 3 of our outstanding young professionals. The first will be Brandon Hermosa Riki, who will soon be headed to Glasgow. He will moderate the dialogue on cities, which will feature community leaders from Hastings-on-Hudson and New Rochelle. Second, we will have Raina Cotterville, co-chair of our Young Professionals program, and she will moderate the dialogue on schools, which includes the superintendent of schools from White Plains and a student activist from the Mount Vernon STEAM Academy. The dialogue on individual action will be led by Paul Presenju, the other co-chair of the YP program, and will include 1 community activist and 1 student activist. They are all extremely accomplished. We welcome your questions in the chat and urge you to ask questions specifically related to the dialogue being presented. We have a slide at the end with some of the resources mentioned by the speakers that we will send to all of you following the program. Today, we are very fortunate to have 2 powerful women who will be represented at the climate talks starting next week. First, our keynote speaker is Martina Donlin, head of the climate team at the UN's Department of Global Communications. Previously, she led a UN communications team on the Sustainable Development Goals and headed communications and change management at the Center for UN Peacekeeping Operations in Uganda. Martina holds a master's degree from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy in Boston and a bachelor's from the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva, Switzerland. We are absolutely thrilled that she could be with us in the midst of preparations for the climate conference known as COP26 in Glasgow. You are welcome to ask questions in the chat related to the keynote address. Following her presentation, we are delighted to have Sarah Beth Broccoli, who leads the Stockholm International Water Institute's engagement with the private sector and stakeholder relations during World Water Week. In fact, she has devoted her entire career to climate action since she attended COP15 in Copenhagen in 2009, when she was still a student. Martina Donlin, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and hello from Brooklyn. It's indeed the UN's birthday, so I want to pull up a few slides and have just a short presentation for you, and we'll then be happy to take your questions. So happy birthday to the UN. I think it is more important than ever probably to celebrate the multilateralism, the forum, the convening power of the United Nations, which is more important than ever, especially as we're a week out from COP26, where we'll be bringing countries together to cooperate, to collaborate in a spirit of solidarity and multilateralism. That's what the UN is all about. So it's great that you are celebrating this day with us. Now, our guiding agenda, of course, remains the Sustainable Development Goals. As you all know, it's the agenda for peace, for human rights, for economic and social development. It guides all of the UN's work. And climate action, of course, is part of that and is really linked to all of it. Be it jobs, be it education, be it sustainable communities, green cities, partnerships, all of this comes together and is interconnected. But today we want to focus on climate action, and that's the focus of my work. As you heard in the introductions, I lead a small team in the Department of Global Communications. It used to be actually part of the bigger team that works on the SDGs, but we decided this year it was important enough to form a separate team just focused on climate. And I have the honor to be heading this, and we're working very closely together with the Secretary General's team to make sure we are closely aligned on the policy front and what we're asking. So I can talk a little bit about how we communicate, what we communicate, and what our priorities are. So the basis for everything we do and say at the UN really is the science, the climate science. And as you've all heard, the IPCC report in August was really that code red. And that's a quote from the Secretary General that was very widely picked up. And I think one of the first times that these IPCC reports really broke into, the late night host shows and the schools, and everybody was talking about code red. That message really broke through, because it is really alarming. It is an emergency. The IPCC was very clear. The human impact on the climate is irrefutable. The impacts are strong, are worsening, and some are irreversible. And there is a narrow window where we can still act, and we can still make the changes needed to keep the temperature rise at a limit where this planet will remain livable. And that limit is 1.5 degrees. We are already at 1.1 degrees of warming over pre-industrial levels, looking at it from a global perspective. And our goal is really to keep that 1.5 degrees within reach. So it's all about the science. It can get, as I'm learning myself, getting into this topic, it gets really technical, it gets really scientific, but that's the basis, right? That's why this is such an emergency. The science is very, very clear. Now, that's why the Secretary General has said again and again, it is time for leaders to stand up and lead, to stand up and deliver, or else people in all countries will pay a price. And we've already seen, this summer in particular, it was very striking, the climate impacts that we saw everywhere, right? From the fires in California, in Australia, to the floods in Europe and China, to the droughts in Madagascar, famines, storms, droughts, floods. It was clear that this is going to hit everybody everywhere. It is also clear that the poorest and the most vulnerable are being hit the worst. Those that have actually contributed the least to the problem are being hit the worst. that's why we come back to this idea of solidarity. So, and this is what we're looking at for COP really, is for the big countries, those with a big responsibility for the big chunks of greenhouse gas emissions, they have to step up and submit credible plans for rapid reductions in those greenhouse gases. That's the only way we're going to keep the temperature down. So rapid greenhouse gas emissions cuts from the big emitters, from the G20, the major economies. Secondly, we need support for the developing countries. Those that are suffering, they don't have the means to invest in green technologies, to build green economies, and they don't have the means to build up their resilience and adapt to the impacts, to put up climate resilient infrastructure, to adapt food systems to droughts, etc. We need financial support. So that's another call on the leaders of the big economies. Mobilize the financing that you have promised years ago to support developing countries in developing sustainably and adapting to climate impacts. And the third ask that the Secretary General has put out there is very much focused on this question of adaptation. And that goes with the financing angle, but currently only about a quarter of all climate financing goes to adaptation. 3/4 goes to green technologies, cutting emissions, which is very, very important. But the Secretary General is saying at least half of all finance support should go to building resilience, to adapting, to building drought-resistant seeds, to building seawalls and fortifying, where the sea level will rise, to protect people's homes. It's all about protecting lives and livelihoods in the end. So that's where we're also hoping to see a little bit of a breakthrough on the adaptation angle of the policy priorities. Now, everyone has the power to make the change. And here's another quote from the Secretary General. And we'll use a lot of his quotes in our communications, as you can see. And we make these, quote cards that go out on social media. And it's really a way to get out some short and easy to understand messages. So he said, we have immense power. We can save our world or condemn humanity to a hellish future. It's our choice. And it's the leaders' choice, right? Again, at COP, the UN is bringing leaders together, we're bringing countries together, but it's really up to the national leaders to take the steps that are necessary. It's up to those presidents, prime ministers, and other ministers who will be coming to show us they are willing to take action. They have credible plans to cut emissions. They have ways to mobilize the funding they have promised, etc. We're looking to national leaders to lead the way. And beyond that, however, and those of you who have been to COPs know this, there will be many other announcements coming from the private sector, coming from regional and local governments, coming from other sectors of civil society, youth, foundations. There will be a groundswell of activity and announcements of solutions and action that will keep hope alive, I believe. And we will very much be highlighting that during the 2 weeks as well. And since this, I think this webinar today here is very much also about what local communities can do, what you can do in your home, in your city, in your community. I wanted to talk a little bit about our Act Now campaign. So, in complement to everything else we do on the, talking to national governments and really targeting the policy level, we also have this campaign, and you can find it at un.org/actnow. This campaign speaks directly to the consumer, to the individual, because people want to be part of the solution. People ask us constantly, what can I do? How can I contribute? And there are simple things everyone can do at home. There are ways you can cut your, travel. There are ways you can eat more sustainably. There are ways you can save energy. All of those are ways that you can contribute. And as a collective, this will make a difference. And this will also show leaders that people are ready, people are moving, there is change, let's go. And that's what the Act Now campaign it tries to do. And you will see we have a counter on our website, and we're about to hit 4 million individual actions logged. And there's a mobile app and a chat bot where you can log your action. Every time you did something for the climate, you say, I did it, and we count that. And so we're about to reach 4 million, really showing that there is a groundswell of change happening. And as I mentioned, the key areas where, if you want to make a difference as an individual, the biggest area probably is on the energy front. If you can switch your home energy from a coal or oil supplier, if you can switch to solar energy or wind, if you get this from a renewable source, that will make a huge difference. Also, pretty simple things like using less hot water, hang drying your clothes, using your dryer less, all that will save a lot of energy and will help the climate. Transport options are clear. Flying is pretty carbon intensive. So is driving. And food is actually the other frontier. And I think this will come out in the next or second to next IPCC report coming out next year, where they will highlight changes in diet as a big avenue for more sustainable lifestyles, meaning more plant-based, less animal-based foods. So for Act Now, we have a range of 10 actions you can explore on our website if you're interested. It's also a great resource for schools, for instance. If you're a teacher, if you're looking for educational materials, we have some of that. And one action that we always promote, and this is not working, here we go, is speak up. And this is probably the one that's most important right now in the days before COP and during COP. Speak up, make your voice heard, lobby for climate action, lobby for change, speak to your representatives, speak to your local officials, speak to your friends and family, speak to business leaders, speak up and say we need change. And if we keep up that pressure from the bottom up, we believe it might push leaders to act. So speak up is one of the actions we do recommend. And lastly, we have also some resources. And again, if you have children under 12, if you're a teacher looking for resources, we have these 8 climate heroes that teach kids, from an early age and empower them how to become climate heroes. So that's a resource also at your availability. And with that, I want to just leave you with our web addresses for Act Now or for climate action more broadly. On this second website here, un.org/climate-action, you can follow during COP. We will have a daily blog, we will have a daily newsletter, a podcast, daily news. If you go there, you will find everything you need to follow along with the action over the next 2 or 3 weeks. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for that, Martina. Hi, Sarah Beth Broccoli here. I am really excited to begin this kind of fireside chat session that we have with Martina, the remaining time that we are able to kind of talk about the communication strategy that the United Nations is using to really target individual action, and then how that connects to the international agenda. So we did have a few questions in the chat, but I think maybe we can open it up a bit more broadly before we even get to that point and talk about this idea of a COP is so difficult for people to first understand, like, why has this been happening since 1992, and what is really the role of an engaged, active citizen to observe, to be present. And one of the unique things at this COP is that it's a hybrid event. So I'd love to hear from you, Martina, how your team is looking to bridge the gap between people who will be on the ground at COP, which are a few people on this panel today, and then how, I think my mom's in the audience, like if she wanted to tune in, like what could she do? Is there an avenue for that?
Yeah, that's a great point. It is a special COP. It is, of course, it was postponed. It was supposed to happen last year. It was postponed because of COVID. It is happening today. I mean, this year, despite, problems, logistical hurdles to overcome, to say the least, for travel, for participants, for vaccines, etc. I'm sure you've read all about it. But the UN was determined that it is too important to delay it once again. Presence, in-person presence makes a big difference when it comes to negotiations. There's just a different dynamic. If we really want to see progress, we need to get people into a room. So that's what we're doing. But as you say, it's going to be hybrid. People can participants can dial in and participate virtually. That country delegates, others, and the public can of course listen in. There's going to be a public webcast. I don't have the link for you right now, but it is going to be on the UN FCCC channel, and you will find it on the website that I indicated. We will have it there. So most of the sessions, like the official sessions and some of the side events, will be webcast live, so you can dial in and watch it anytime. And all of the big broadcasters will be there. Thousands of media have been accredited. It's going to be on TV channels across the world. You should easily be finding a way to tune in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really interesting. So as Marcia explained earlier, is that my first COP was Copenhagen, and whoever has looked at rhetoric from before that has been like, wow, what a failure, et cetera. And in my mind as a student, it wasn't. There were a lot of interesting things that happened, had the largest representation from civil society observers ever. And I think that one point this probably raises, and I'll cue it up for a question in the chat, is a lot of questions around equity or representation. You and I are white women, certainly in the movement, but I think one of the larger questions is this COP going to be really representative enough of the whole aspect of what climate change will affect? And it's not necessary for you or I to pass judgment on it, but it is something that's worth talking about in a state like this, to figure out if we are trying to get more and more people involved in resources that look like and reflect who they are and where they are, how can we be more observant and aware of what those things could be? And maybe from your personal experience, what you've seen over the past 10 years, how has it changed? We could hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And at this COP, big efforts were made also by the UK host government, right, to bring in as many people as we can from the developing countries, to really make it inclusive. And I think if we look at the climate movement, more broadly, it has broadened. For instance, Greta is no longer the only youth voice out there. There's Vanessa Nakate from Uganda, who is becoming a very big voice, who is going around with Greta many times, representing, the African voice. There are such important players, from the small island countries. I've recently just spoken to the Pacific Islands Forum, and what they are trying to do. And they are, of course, on the front lines of all of this. It really is a global movement, and it affects everybody, and most of all the developing world. So those voices, we always try to give them a platform whenever we can on our channels, in our communications. That is absolutely key.
No, and thank you for that comment as well. And I wonder if you have any advice for a lot of people who are on the channel now, and some people who will be doing the moderation after this, they're students. If you have an opportunity to give one sentence of advice for them about to embark upon their climate change journey, what would you say? I know it's
well, first I would say study the science, the climate science. Those IPCC reports are a bit long to go through in detail, but there always are summaries. They are worth reading. So read the summaries of the IPCC reports. And from there, go and be active, raise your voice, speak up, get others involved, multiply, your impact by getting others involved, and especially by lobbying for action by leaders, business leaders, local leaders, government leaders. That's what we need.
And I think transformative dialogues usually are helped by people. Like I remember one of my mentors is always say to us, there's no room for despair. A lot of these processes are glacially slow, but the importance of interacting at a multilateral level does trickle down, but the opportunity for people to, as you said before, speak up can reach volumes. So some aspects of the chat that we have coming through, people are very interested in how can we create more transformational dialogues between minorities and cultures which have not been yet introduced to issues around climate change. And I think there are a lot of really excellent NGO groups on the ground that are working with this. The private sector has done a large amount of opportunity working space, like in my context, working at Stockholm Water Institute. The entire aspect of doing place-based water basin management theory is something that has been on books for the past 10 years, but has undergone a new campaign of communications to get people attached to the resource that they're using, and then also how to speak up and protect it. So I do wonder if we can't maybe bucket some of these questions that are in the chat to figure out if there isn't a space for a particular minority at COP, what is a good step in your mind for them to start to engage?
So if they're at COP, you know, they will likely be heard, right? They will have a side event, or they will participate in a briefing or whatnot. And because there are different platforms there are UN events, there are public events, there are many different platforms where they can make their voices heard. And looking at the list of events at COP, and you know this, and you've been to many COPs, Sarah Beth, you know, there is a huge variety of constituencies organizing events there and speaking up. And that's the great thing about these COPs. And I think we're going to see that again this year. You know, and those who can't travel there and can't be there, and there are many, of course, you know, there are ways to, as you said, link up to NGOs, link up with private sector companies to drive that change, that, you know, first at the local level and then taking it more globally. But we're seeing lots of great initiatives by cities. You know, there's this famous C40 cities.
C40, exactly.
Right, there are many cities there that are really leading in climate action. They are leaders. They are taking it at the local level and initiating green changes at that level, very much with the involvement of communities, and not just in the Europe and the US, but we're seeing that throughout the developing world as well. So that's really encouraging, and I think that the local level is really a way to get engaged.
No, and I appreciate that comment, because it's an excellent segue onto the next part of our programming. And I do regret that we can't get to all of these questions, but the one thing that makes me excited about these questions is that so much of the direct answers would be available just by going to Martina's website and figuring out how you can start to get engaged, not just at COP26, but COPs beyond COP26, and then certainly the day-to-day interactions for how you as an individual can work on against mitigating or adapting to the negative effects of climate change. So with that, I do want to thank you for your time today, and really excited to potentially maybe have a cup of coffee with you at COP. But
let's try.
I know. And Brandon, I'm going to switch it over to you, our resident University of Connecticut undergraduate student, ready to take on the panel on cities. So with that, we will both bow out and give the rest of the stage out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martina and Sarah Beth, for that productive conversation. At this point, I will be moderating a dialogue on cities with my panelists, Mayor Nicola Armacost and Councilmember Sarah Kay. So just some brief context of who these panelists are. Mayor Nicola Armacost has served as the mayor of Hastings-on-Hudson since 2019, and from 2009 to 2019 as trustee. As mayor, she has championed sustainability initiatives and building local resiliency in climate change. Councilmember Sarah Kay serves as a New Rochelle City Council member and is a leader in the fight against climate change. She sponsored a resolution declaration of climate emergency in New Rochelle, which passed in 2021 with unanimous support from the City Council. Sarah works in collaboration with the community and city to implement Green NR, known as Green New Rochelle, the city's 20-year sustainability plan. I myself am the moderator and am an undergraduate student at the University of Connecticut, pursuing a bachelor's in civil engineering with a focus on urban infrastructure and sustainability. I will be also attending the COP26 in Glasgow and hope to be sharing my opinions on how the future should look. So with that said, let's get into our conversation on cities. Mayor Armacost and Councilmember Kay, thank you both for being here with us. A shared experience for both of you is the respective leadership roles you both hold in your communities. As we discuss methods to mitigate climate change at the global level, we are reminded of the real-world impacts our communities are experiencing now. Only a few months ago, devastating rain events impacted our shoreline communities. This reminds us climate change is here. Since these events, have you found an increased importance for finding solutions to these problems in your communities? Mayor Armacost, let's start with you.
Absolutely, Brandon. Our community has been deeply committed to addressing climate issues for many years, but the recent extreme weather events you were alluding to certainly have brought the focus brought everything into much sharper focus locally. During the most recent storms, we were really very severely affected. All the exits off the Sawmill River Parkway were flooded out because the parkway had temporarily reverted to being a river, resulting in people and cars being stranded and requiring rescue by our fire department. And there were many, many flooded basements all over the village. In response, we've been looking at resiliency measures such as green infrastructure that will absorb or redirect water, such as rainwater gardens, green roofs, green parking lots. We're also assessing our culverts and dams, our sewer systems, which no one thinks about except in these types of flood events, to see if they need to be expanded or re-engineered. So yes, our community is now much more conscious about these issues, and we're seeing a real interest in building community resilience.
That's great to hear from Hastings-on-Hudson that they're using natural infrastructure to also fight natural events. Councilmember Kay, how about in New Rochelle?
Thank you, Brandon. And I want to start by just saying I'm truly humbled to be a part of this amazing event that you all have put together. And so, yes, New Rochelle also was hit very hard and had experienced extensive flooding from the Hurricane Ida. And I spoke to families that were left homeless. Some people had 8 feet of water and sewage in their homes, and the recovery is still ongoing. And I think it's just become very clear that these extreme weather events are happening much more frequently. You know, just a couple of years ago, the climate change rhetoric really centered around the mess that we're going to be leaving our children. But now I think it's increasingly apparent that this isn't just the next generation's problem. It's right here, right now. The summer was one of the hottest and wettest on record. And, you know, I've lived in my home for less than 10 years, and we've already experienced an unprecedented number of severe storms, hurricanes, and nor'easters that led to weeks-long power outages and massive trees falling that destroyed homes and lives. I think we're waking up to the reality that we are vulnerable. And part of that is because our infrastructure is inadequate and has been neglected for a long time. And, you know, fortunately in New Rochelle, we're about 5 years into a 10-year capital improvement plan and making sanitary sewer and storm drain improvements. And then in addition to the traditional gray infrastructure, I'm hopeful that we're going to increasingly turn to more nature-based solutions. You know, right now, the New Rochelle City Council is considering a series of green infrastructure projects that are going to be placed in frontline communities who are the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So this plan would help to improve walkability near our train center and also add pocket parks and permeable bike lanes and put in place, you know, more green infrastructure at our traffic islands, which could help with stormwater mitigation and also provide other benefits like reducing the urban heat island effect.
Great to hear, Councilmember Kay. I guess these events were a double-edged sword. They kind of hit us out of nowhere, but they really brought the problem into real-world context for your communities. So I'm going to move on to our next question. So apart from the importance of preparing for climate change, a strong counterweight in the conversation is what can we as communities do to lower our carbon footprint now? Because that is propagating climate change. For communities big and small across Westchester, there has been an increasing importance on improving mobility options. With 29% of total US greenhouse gas emissions coming from the transportation sectors, have both of you in your communities seen planning standards considering mechanisms for transportation-oriented development? Let's start with you, Councilmember Kay.
Sure, that's a great question. You know, New Rochelle's done a lot in order to improve our mobility options. And our entire comprehensive plan is really centered around transit-oriented development. We're encouraging development a half a mile from our train station and creating a more pedestrian-friendly environment. And that will then reduce our dependency on cars. We've made a number of other investments to try to expand mobility options. So we have a free fully electric shuttle. And just this year, we were able to expand the number of vehicles and double the service area. We're working to create a system of bike paths that can connect different parts of the city to our downtown. And we also have a number of complete streets programs that are focused on making our roads more pedestrian and bike friendly. And then you also talked about embracing renewable technology, which is another important part of the solution. And so our city partnered with Sustainable Westchester to bring several energy saving programs to residents, like community solar and grid rewards. And both of those programs allow residents to contribute to climate initiatives while at the same time lower your utility bills. And New Rochelle is also one of the first cities to participate in Westchester Power, which is a community choice aggregation program that delivers 100% clean energy to customers.
Wow, that's great to hear New Rochelle is doing all these things together, both with transportation-oriented development and with clean energy from renewables. How about you, Mayor Armacost?
It's so wonderful to hear what Sarah is saying, because we're doing similar things. We're actually in the process right now of creating a climate action plan and a climate adaptation plan, and we're about to revise our comprehensive plan. So it's a really exciting moment, because each of these planning activities will result in a long list of actions that we can take as a community. And of course, transportation will be certainly a key area of focus. We're expecting to see a bunch of recommendations relating to increasing the uptake of electric vehicles, relating to electric vehicle infrastructure, and encouraging alternate forms of transportation, including biking and walking. We're particularly interested in making improvements to bike parking and putting in bike lanes when we repave our roads. And we've also been encouraging renewable energy technologies by doing some of the things that New Rochelle has been doing, like community choice aggregation. We also ran campaigns to promote rooftop solar and community solar. So, you know, our residents have been contributing in climate initiatives in many different ways. From some of the things that we've talked about, but to planting trees and rainwater gardens, to participating in food scrap recycling, to signing up for community solar, and those are things that are less expensive things, to purchasing electric vehicles, installing solar, and investing in energy efficient appliances. But one of the key things that we're encouraging people to do is to buy local, because obviously you use far fewer greenhouse gas, your carbon footprint is much lower if you're not driving far away from your community. So there are lots of different things that are being suggested, and our young people are some of the most innovative in terms of new ideas that we can promote as a community to make a difference. So we're really excited to see the things that they're coming up with for us.
Yeah, and as I sit here listening to both of you, I know one of you is from a village and the other one is from a city, but it's interesting to see how both landscapes are kind of being cost collaborative in what the initiatives that are being followed through by the municipal governments. Carrying over from that question is another question more related to now how communities can act. Now, both of you in your communities are leaders in terms of advocating for climate-related risk and sustainability as a responsibility of municipal government's hazard mitigation plans for now and for the future. Hastings-on-Hudson, you lead every other Westchester community in your environmental ranking. New Rochelle, you have a 2030 sustainability plan for the city called Green NR, known as Green New Rochelle, and its sustainability plan. In each of your situations, have you been able to adopt ways for the municipality as a whole to make a plan and begin acting on it? And what are your tips for communities that haven't started yet? I know we touched on these topics, but I'd like to hear a little more from both of you, specifically for small communities who maybe haven't even thought of this. So let's start with you, Mayor Armacost.
Brandon, I'm a huge fan of the New York State Climate Smart Communities and Clean Energy Communities programs. Those have been really helpful to us, and I think that they provide a really good starting place for communities that are interested in starting to stake out a climate plan. The programs give communities the choice of a broad range of actions to pursue. And by documenting what you've already done and being strategic about what you want to do next, you can actually really move the dial locally. Many communities just haven't got around to documenting their climate achievements. And so they don't really have a sense of how much they've already accomplished. The good news is that these programs provide technical assistance and advice and grant funding, particularly actually to more vulnerable communities. That is quite useful in terms of helping communities accomplish various actions. And to get a little bit specific, given that one of our most pressing global climate goals is to radically reduce greenhouse gases by 2050, I would say a really important early action might be to seek funding or support to do a greenhouse gas inventory. Once you know your community's emissions, you can work out whether what actions you might take to continue to reduce your carbon footprint. For us and for most municipalities, the biggest offenders are the transportation and building sectors. So those are good areas to hone in on as a choice of sort of initial actions to pursue.
And Sarah, what are your thoughts on how communities can work on that?
Sure. So I'm somewhat new to elected office. I've been serving on the city council for less than 2 years. So I think I should show a little humility and be careful before giving advice. But I'm still happy to share a few things that I've learned and speak maybe a little more generally. First, I found that persistence really pays off. Climate action requires we do things differently, and most people are resistant to change. So every time I hear no, I sort of silently interpret that as a not yet. I'd also suggest starting by just identifying a couple of projects or goals and organize around that. And with each success, you build capacity and confidence that can lead to more success. There are a lot of initiatives that are win-win in terms of long-term cost savings and sustainability, like energy efficiency projects or community solar. And I'll just echo what the mayor said about the clean energy campaigns and the climate smart communities. It really is just such a great roadmap for specific actions your community can take. And there are great grant incentives. And also their community campaigns are also a really great way to raise awareness and gain public support. And then finally, my last suggestion was just keep in mind you're not alone in this. There are a lot of organizations available like Sustainable Westchester that are able to provide technical expertise and program management and can help leverage the experiences of other municipalities in order to help your community take actions that together can collectively really make a big impact.
Wow. So I have one final question, but it's a short question. But I have a couple questions that I have come in from the chat that I definitely want to make sure I get to ask you. So the first one is for both of you. These flooding issues, they come from Nicola Butterfield, but these flooding issues intersect with the need for affordable housing. How are your cities thinking about this? Mayor Armacost, Councilmember Kay, it's open to both of you. I know New Rochelle is more of a city, and then there's on the village side of facing on the Hudson. So I'll give Councilmember Kay a couple seconds to give her idea on that.
Of course, affordable housing, there's such a critical need for affordable housing in New Rochelle throughout the county. It's, we have a requirement in our development policies to build affordable housing. And I think that that's one of the great things about our transit-oriented development is that we're able to increase our housing stock and be able to put in place so many more units than that will also be sustainable because they're built around our transit center.
And how about Hastings-on-Hudson, Mayor Armacost?
So Brandon, we actually take that issue really seriously. And I would say one of the deficiencies in our community is that there isn't enough affordable housing or rental housing available in the community. So the Westchester mandate is 10% for any new development of to have 10% affordable housing, and we actually up that to 15%. There aren't that many opportunities. I think New Rochelle has more opportunity for new building, but we are very bullish about any development that happens in the community, that it takes this mandate of affordable housing very seriously, and that the affordable housing is built with the same attributes as market rate housing, particularly with respect to environmental factors, so that all of the things that we would expect in market rate housing, we would see in that affordable housing. So we hope to move the dial on that we actually think that possibly in the next 2 years, we will be able to move the dial, which is pretty exciting for us because those developments don't happen that frequently.
Well, it's great to hear that both of your communities are considering this on the affordable housing. So we only have about 2 to 3 minutes left. So I have one quick question for you, Mayor Armacost, since we talked about the Sawmill Parkway earlier that's coming in from someone. So they're saying that the Sawmill Parkway has always been a problem and that methods have been tried. Is there a way to divert the water permanently from these areas that were affected?
So one thing, I think that Councilwoman Kay mentioned humility. One of the things that we should be very humble about is that we are nothing, and nature has been pursuing these pathways with rivers since time immemorial. So the idea of diversion often ends up having unintended consequences. But one of the initiatives that legislator Shimsky has recently re-advocated for, she advocated for this 10 years ago, is for all of the municipalities along the Hudson River to do their part in cleaning out the debris that has fallen across the Sawmill, not Hudson River, the Sawmill River, to clean out the debris so that the blockages and the dams that are kind of created through the debris that has kind of deposited itself over time in the Sawmill River will actually end up being removed, allowing the river to prevail. Yeah, as Peter McCart says, don't mess with Mother Nature, she will prevail. I think that's a message we all need to adapt and not ask Mother Nature to go in a direction that she doesn't want to go. So the county is working really closely with all of the municipalities that are along the Sawmill River, and hopefully we will be able to find some solutions that at least alleviate that. And of course, planting pollinators, planting trees that are better suited to tribute trees, all of those kinds of things will make a difference.
Definitely. So we'll finish it off with this question. It's very short. In 1 or 2 sentences, both Mayor Armacost and Councilmember Sarah Kay, what can you say is the proudest thing your community has done on climate change with cities from your perspective? We'll start with Mayor Armacost. I'm sorry, I muted myself.
So Brandon, reaching silver CSC status and being the top of the leaderboard for the CEC program are things we're proud of for sure. But to tie things back to the international conversation, I'm really very proud that we've committed to our fair share of the Paris Climate Agreement emissions reductions targets. In 2017, when the US government announced that it was withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, we joined with 210 other US municipalities to say we are still in, and we pledged to do our share to meet the Paris emission reduction targets. which for us is a science-based target of 62.8% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, which is substantially more than the US commitment. I know that sounds super ambitious, but based on what we've already put in place, some of which we've discussed, like community choice aggregation and the New York Stretch Energy Code, and making relatively conservative assessments on how many people will switch to electric vehicles, we think we can do it. So I'm really proud of that. And if every community does its fair share, we really will be able to make a difference together.
Thank you for that, Mayor Armacost. And Councilmember Kay, what's the proudest thing coming out of New Rochelle?
Well, I think the thing that will potentially have the greatest impact is our adoption of the downtown overlay zone and the community benefits framework. I know I touched on this earlier. I think it's not immediately obvious how urban development furthers our climate goals, but by using smart growth strategies and building badly needed housing downtown, our transit-oriented development reduces car dependency, and this type of housing does require less energy for heating and cooling our homes. And plus, earlier this year, New Rochelle became the first large municipality to adopt New York Stretch Energy Code. So now all of the new development will have to meet a more stringent energy efficiency standards. And right now, we're making adjustments to our policies in order to recalibrate our community benefits and regulations that are going to further strengthen environmental regulations and incentives.
That's a great way to close it. Thank you both, Mayor Armacost and Councilmember Kay, for taking the time to speak with me on this panel for cities and what's being done locally. Now, at this point, I'm going to transfer it over to Reina Cadavo. She will be moderating our next section with panelists on the topic of schools. Thank you so much, Mayor Armacost and Councilmember Kay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be moderating this panel on the importance of students and education systems in the fight against climate change. I'm Reina. I'm Communications Director and Young Professionals Co-Chair of UNA Westchester and CEO of Urban Refuge. And I've been working to engage young people on climate solutions since I was a student in the White Plains School District myself. Before I introduce my panelists, I want to take a moment to thank Peter McCart, the county government's director on sustainability, for joining us today. And also thank you, Peter, for what you've done to create our county's climate crisis task force and for laying the cornerstone for what we're doing today. Thanks for joining us. So with me today, I'm excited to have Dr. Joseph Ricca, the Superintendent of Schools of the White Plains City School District. Dr. Ricca has 12 years experience as Superintendent of Schools in both New York and New Jersey. He started his career as a history teacher, then served as an assistant principal and principal prior to becoming a superintendent. He was named by the Westchester Business Council to their 40 Under 40 group, and he's currently president of the Southern Westchester BOCES Chief School Administrators Association and president of the Lower Hudson Council of School Superintendents, and he serves on the Westchester County Department of Health's COVID-19 Task Force. A regular contributor to local and national media, Dr. Ricca speaks in support of public schooling, the promise of all children, and the need for a national focus on America's school-aged children. I am also excited to be joined by Haley Gonzalez, who's a high school senior at the Mount Vernon STEAM Academy. In high school, she has been student body president, representing the school in many events, and captain of the soccer team. After high school, she plans to attend college and major in political science and business, pursuing her passions in human rights and law. Thank you both for joining me. With young people like Greta Thunberg, Shateska Martinez, and so many others leading the charge, it's become very clear that young voices must and will be a central and leading part of the conversation and action to beat climate change. Schools in particular play a huge role in shaping who we become, and they can help make our young people responsible and active stewards of our planet through classes, after-school activities, professional development opportunities, and by setting an example by investing in green policies and facilities themselves. On that note, I'd like to now turn it over to our panelists. Dr. Ricca, to start, I'd love to hear about how you and the White Plains School District are investing in sustainability and sustainable education. I know you're doing a lot. Can you share some details about the green initiatives that have been introduced during your time as superintendent and the impact that they're making?
Well, good afternoon, Raina, and everybody. Good afternoon, Haley. It's such an honor to be here with all of you, Raina. We're all so proud of you in White Plains. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this very, very important conversation. I'm also joined this afternoon by two of our amazing Board of Education leaders, President Rosemary Eller and Trustee Brady. Cheryl Brady is with us in the group. And, you know, they're here because sustainability and equity are really hand in hand. And in the White Plains City School District, we've really tried to infuse sustainability into everything that we do. So it's more than sort of a standalone singular conversation that you might have, you know, a one-off in a classroom. Really, we've integrated this work into everything that we do here in the school district. And, you know, like so many things, our children, our students, young people of today are going to be the ones to lead us and bring us to where we need to be. You know, it wasn't too long ago that we were listening to virologists and epidemiologists warn the world that we would very soon be facing a pandemic that would likely bring us to our knees. And then, of course, lo and behold, here we are, right? So let's not do the same thing when it comes to climate change. Let's not do the same thing when it comes to sustainability. Let's recognize that the science is clear, as our friends from the United Nations have mentioned at the beginning of the program. You know, for us, certainly infusing and incorporating the spirit and the tenets of sustainability into classroom conversations is important. But we also need to walk the walk. So what does that mean? It means that when the school district creates opportunities for infrastructure revitalization, for instance, the American Rescue Plan, resources that have been brought into school districts all throughout the country, the White Plains City School District is going to invest all of that money, other than the earmarked money for learning loss, into our physical plant, into our infrastructure and HVAC and efficiencies therein. When we change windows out, we make sure that we're going into a high efficiency replacement cycle. We were the first school district in New York State to incorporate 5 electric school buses into our fleet, and we're still in that pilot program right now with Con Edison and with others. And you know, these are the types of steps I think that can help to facilitate that ongoing conversation in the classroom. You know, what do we do in our cafeterias every day? Well, we make sure that food waste and recycling are separated out each and every single day. We've reduced our overall food waste to a single or two bags versus dozens of bags on a daily basis. And you know, these are small steps, but they're important steps. Moving into solar throughout the school district, and again, partnering with our students to support their advocacy, to shifting the sort of culture of carbon and the culture of overuse. And you know, we've been making those steps, and I think we've been doing so in a manner that is not only good for the White Plains City School District and the city of White Plains proper, but the steps that we're taking in our school district are also replicable anywhere. And that's really important for folks to understand and to know, is that you don't have to have additional resources to make good, solid decisions on a daily basis about what you can do personally, but also as a family unit and as a community unit. And you know, the mayor and council were extraordinary in depicting ways that we can all work in those areas. So we're really proud of the work that we've been doing. It's again, like equity work, it's forever work, but we also have to ensure that it's front and center and that it's part of all of our planning processes moving forward.
Absolutely. It's really been an inspiration to see the movement that White Plains schools have been making. And as you mentioned, I hope they can and will be emulated elsewhere. It really makes me proud to be an alum. And I also want to say thank you for our Board of Education trustees for joining us today. Thanks for being with us. So building from your response to the previous question, the White Plains schools, I mean, they certainly played a huge role in shaping my role as an activist. So I'm curious, how are the students reacting to these initiatives? I mean, White Plains is really known for producing student leaders. What actions have students initiated or led themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you, Raina. And I think it's so important for us adults to hear the answer to this question because it's important and it's the truth. Students actually they know what's right, and they very quickly want to move in the right direction. It's actually harder to change habit and practices in the adult world than it is in the student world. Students get it. And they understand that if they don't make changes in the way in which we are operating as a society, they learn it from a very young age. It's one of the 5 pillars of social studies: human and environment interaction. What are you doing, like we were talking about water diversion, that is going to change the impact of nature? And nature, like we said before, finds a way. So we have to work in concert and in support of nature, and that our children see that and they get that really right out of the gate, which is fantastic.
Amazing. I do love that about White Plains. And so speaking of students engaging with climate action, I love to hear that you're actually studying the Sustainable Development Goals in school, Haley. So from your perspective, the perspective of a student, a young person, what role do you think that young people should be playing in achieving goal number 13, climate action? And to build on that, why do you think it's important that young people are actually a central part of this solution?
Thank you for the question, Reina. Mount Vernon STEAM Academy hosts a STEAM exposition every year where students study the SDGs in a country of their choice. We evaluate the issues, we pose solutions, and educate other young students, parents, instructors, and people of our community as well. In the past years, I have studied the SDGs in Thailand, Dominican Republic, and my community itself, Mount Vernon, New York. Throughout my studies, I have learned a lot about the economy, the environment, and problems in different countries. My research has allowed me to see the great impact of climate change. For example, the average global temperature climbed by 0.85 Celsius between 1880 to 2012. Between 1981 and 2002, a warmer environment resulted in severe output declines of 40 megatons per year in maize, wheat, and other major crops around the world. The worldwide average sea level rose 19 centimeters between 1901 and 2010, as seas expanded due to glacier melting. Just knowing information like this is very inspirational because when you study and you delve deeper into this research, you're able to actually experience and see what's going on, and it makes you want to make a difference in the world. And from my perspective, it is necessary to be engaged with the SDGs because not only does it open our young minds, but our experiences as well. Being able to analyze what is going on outside of our environment is critical because then we can make connections with our surroundings, educate ourselves, and apply solutions to the matter. We are the leaders of tomorrow. So by delving into the SDGs, we can explore issues such as climate change at an early age and be prepared to take on the challenge as we mature. As young students, it is imperative that we correspond with the factuality of the world. We are a generation filled with bright minds, and amongst us are scientists, researchers, mathematicians, and politicians who are ready to educate and bring change into the world.
Absolutely well said, Haley. Young people are our future. And actually, same question for you, Dr. Ricca. You work so closely with students on a daily basis. Why is it important from a superintendent's perspective and an educator's perspective that young people be a part of the solution?
Yeah, and I'm smiling from ear to ear because Haley just, embodied that better than I could ever say it, right? So, and again, thank you, Haley, for your leadership and also for the words, right? They know, and we as educators and parents and guardians and community members, we need to support and elevate them. We need to support and elevate their voice and their reach and their impact, because as Haley just said, and as you know very well, Raina, it's only a couple of years outside of the traditional high school setting where these young folks are in leadership positions and have the opportunity to truly move the conversation forward, and it needs to go faster. And we can talk about how schools or individual school districts or what they're doing and what we're doing to increase sustainability and to learn more. But truthfully, as the keynote mentioned at the very beginning, we need bold leadership. We need to recognize that we have to, as a global community, break away from the security and safety of what's been done in the past and recognize that embracing the technology that we have now and the technology that we can develop will truly elevate the entire global community and protect us and our planet. And those are the types of steps, the bold action that needs to happen. And I believe that students like Haley are going to be the ones that are going to be shepherding us older folks through that process. And thanks, Haley, for that. And, you know, and sustainability should be part of every curricular endeavor in every classroom. There is a way to connect the conversation about ensuring that our footprint is one that is you know, not harmful to our community, and kids can learn that from a very early age. And you know, those small practices lead to habits, and those habits lead to character, and that's what we want to do as children progress and emerge from our K-12 schools.
Absolutely. Thank you for that response. And now I want to take a couple of questions from the chat. We actually have some amazing questions coming in. So to start, so this one's for Dr. Ricca. Did the pandemic and the emphasis on remote learning shift the focus away from sustainability and environmental efforts at all? And I mean, did it even maybe increase those efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think actually the pandemic is something that is illustrative to, you know, this challenge that we have, where we're trying to harness nature, and we can't. What we need to recognize and be humble and recognize that you can't harness nature. We have to operate as sort of guests, right? Imagine, you know, guests on this planet, and you want to be a good guest. And I think, you know, moving to remote learning or hybrid learning or all those challenges that we face through, you know, COVID-19 really shouldn't have shifted at all away from sustainability. You know, in our school district, we continued with our practices, we continued, you know, with our efforts. So, and again, as I mentioned, with these resources that school districts are now receiving through the American Rescue Plan, through the CARES Act, all of those other opportunities and infrastructure work that's going to be coming, you know, we can't lose sight of making sure that our physical plants are as sustainable as possible. We built Post Road School 10 years ago. We harnessed energy, you know, in the earth through geothermal operations within the facility. Our new facilities, whenever we make upgrades, they're always going to be pointed towards sustainability. Instead of replacing water fountains, we have bottle fillers. You know, we're looking for every way to not only, again, teach students and give them and model for students, but also create an organization that is going to be a more sustainable organization and better for our community.
Absolutely. And it's good to hear that this has been, you know, taken as a lesson to further incorporate this kind of education and work. And Haley, do you have anything to add to that? Have you seen climate education continue during the pandemic? Has it changed at all in the way that you learn?
Well, in my school, Mount Vernon STEAM Academy, we continued to learn about like climate change. Even though everything was virtual, we still held our annual STEAM exposition. And instead, what we did was we used Padlet as a way to collaborate with other students and present the information that we learned from around the world. And we were still able to collaborate with the community, parents, and instructors in the same way that we would have done if it was in person. We were able to actually give the information to more people, given that it was virtual. And it was just like nothing changed because we were all still able to educate ourselves and educate others as well.
And I think you bring up a really important point that technology is actually playing a leading role in how youth are leading this movement to fight climate change. And it's amazing to see how you're harnessing that. A couple more questions I think we can take from the chat. So one, again, leading with Dr. Ricca. So you seem in a class of your own as a superintendent in Westchester County, have to agree. Why are so few other districts supporting students both academically and in modeling a sustainable future? So do you talk with other superintendents at all? And why are so many districts so slow from your perspective to focus on such a main issue in our times?
Well, thank you very much for that compliment. Certainly, you know, for us here in White Plains, it's the effort of the entire team. You know, I think, you know, I wouldn't want to say that superintendents or other school districts aren't, you know, engaged in this work. I think, you know, as anybody who is involved in schools knows, there is a lot of work, and often unfairly, when there's a challenge in the world, we immediately pivot and look to schools and say, hey, you have to figure out a way to fix this, right? So, schools certainly are operating and doing, this work, much like we do the work to ensure that future generations, avoid drugs and alcohol, and they buckle their seatbelts and they don't walk into people's houses next Sunday on Halloween, and all of the other things, that schools talk to children about. Sustainability, I do believe, in the conversation related to sustainability and climate is occurring. It's occurring all throughout school districts. I think the approaches to their actions are certainly different. I don't know what, the why there, but I can hazard to guess that much of it has to do with inertia. Things are hard to shift. And again, like we talk about, we have to make sure we're teaching children about sustainability. Yes, we do. But we also have to make sure that we, as the adults and the ones who are presently in charge, are also doing our part, not only to teach, our contemporaries, but also for those who refuse to be taught, that we make the shifts that need to be made to make our world a safer and more sustainable place. Remember, there was a period of time where people would say to you, "I will absolutely never wear a seatbelt," right? And it took a number of years and a lot of cognitive behavioral therapies. Think about that little ding that goes off in your car every time you don't put your seatbelt on. That's by design. We need to harness those same types of steps to ensure that people are not taking, steps in their own personal lives that are unsustainable. So looking for incentives, looking for educational opportunities, all those things, yes. But at the same time, it's going to take some bold strokes and folks who are going to step out in front and do what's right rather than necessarily what's easy or profitable.
Good point. I think that's very valid, that we've taken on, if anything, equally enormous challenges before to ensure the safety of everyone in our country and hopefully in the world. So, if you think about it that way, we can tackle this, no problem. And so one last question that I want to take from the chat before we close up this panel, and it seems like a popular one, it's been recurring. So the question is, what sustainability and climate change awareness initiatives are there to help our environment and the animals that call it home? So I want to broaden that a little bit to say, what sustainability initiatives do you both know of that students could get involved in, or people in general could get involved in, that you would recommend for those who want to leave today's event and take the next step? Feel free to get started, Haley.
Haley, you could go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, one thing that I actually did over the summer with my school was that we renovated the school garden. We've always just had it there, and we came together as students and we cleaned it up a little bit, took out weeds, and just made it a beautiful place that students could be in. Personally, things that you could do is recycle. Well, that's a really popular one. And just make sure you research, like all you can, just research things that you could apply not only to your home, but as well as your community. That's really important to know what you're doing and apply it to your real life.
Those are great.
Absolutely.
There are so many cool things that you can do, Raina, and I'll just give you a few easy ones, and then you can all run back to your PTAs and boards of education and share these. First of all, Spirit Day, where children wear the clothing of their school or of their school district. Create a Spirit Day closet in every school so that those sweatshirts that the little ones grow out of, they get recycled and handed down to new generations of kids coming up. Not only do those new parents not have to go and buy new sweatshirts, but they also then have an opportunity to ensure that they're recycling. A simple, little, easy step, community gardens. We have community gardens in all of our schools where the children actually grow, and they grow great vegetables. And then they have, farmers markets and farm sales. Every day at lunch, let's make sure we're recycling, we're separating out those items that can be recycled and those items that can be composted. And then start a compost at your school or work with a local not-for-profit organization. And there are many of them in Westchester County that you could partner with to, again, create that composting sustainability action. Things like Walk Bike to School Day. We just held that a couple of weeks ago, October 6th. It was a great event in White Plains. Again, can be replicated in every single community. Every community in Westchester County should be celebrating Walk Bike to School Day. You know, we have a beautiful, beautiful county, and you know, and in many communities, the easy walking paths to their buildings. So those are just some of the types of things that you can do, and certainly the lessons in class, learning about the ecosystem. You could adopt an endangered species or animals, and we do that in our classrooms, you know, so that kids are really getting their hands into the conversation related to their climate and their interaction with their climate. Learning about, you know, animal husbandry and all these types of things, and recognizing that, you know, vegetables, fruits and vegetables, food that we grow is more sustainable than food, you know, that come from meat and animals that are raised. So all of these types of things are really, really important, and they can take place in any school all throughout the county.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for your suggestions. It's so true that these are things that we can incorporate into our daily lives and be making an impact just by living the right way and living sustainably. So, of course, thank you both for joining us today, for your insider insights into how we can make this impact. And I know everyone will be leaving inspired and ready to take action. So thank you both. And now I'm excited to
Thank you.
And now I'm excited to turn it over to Paul Presenju, co-chair of our Young Professionals program and a leading climate activist in Westchester County himself. Paul, over to you.
Thank you so much, Raina. Thank you, everyone. So I'm proud to have been appointed by the United Nations Foundations and the United Nations Associations of the United States of America to be the second global ambassador for the 13th Sustainable Development Goal of climate action. Our third panel will be highlighting two members of our Westchester County community doing exceptional work to combat climate change through an intergenerational lens. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to notify everyone that I have received notification that we'll be extending our panel to about 2:45 p.m. because we're a little bit behind schedule. And we'll also make accommodations for Caitlin, you to give your responses first, because I know you have time restrictions as well. Our first panelist is Joseph Carvin, who founded One World and Virtuous, an organization committed to improving human understanding and cooperation through education. Also, Joe is a former supervisor for the town of Rye. And our second panelist is Caitlin Carpenter, a 16-year-old senior at Mamaroneck High School. She's the co-founder and co-coordinator of Sunrise Westchester and the Westchester County Regional Field Organizer and Director of Finance for New York State Climate Leaders. Caitlin, you'll get the first question. Young leaders such as yourself, Greta Thunberg, Vanessa Nakate, and Alexandria Villaseñor have done amazing work to support our international youth climate agenda. What can attendees do to better connect our youth to the climate movement for needed systematic reform?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been fantastic so far, and thank you for the question. I think that other speakers before me have handled this issue, but education really is the key to all of this. I think a lot of young people don't realize the power that they have in youth climate organizing and the power that they have over the climate movement period. A lot of stuff has been said and I think has been ingrained into our brains about recycling and composting and general personal sustainability, but young people have a lot more power than just that. Young voices are crazy powerful, and I use the word power a lot in the last sentence, but it is a good word for what I'm trying to say here. Anyways, young voices are incredibly powerful on the county and state and regional and global level. We've seen that with those youth activists that you've just mentioned there. But honestly, any young person has a role to play in the climate movement. I think in terms of connecting our youth to general climate movement for systemic reform, as you talked about before, we have to make sure that young people realize that whatever their skills are useful in this movement. And so there's rallying, if people like to do rallying. There are organizations for that. If people are really into art and music, there's a creative role to play in the climate movement. And then there's also, like, if you want to do more lobbying or speaking like this, in terms of more like professional settings, there's also a role for that. I'm actually going to drop in the chat a Google Doc that I just put together that has links to several different youth activist organizations that everybody who is, and obviously, you know, it's not endorsing any of these specific organizations, and they are all across the political spectrum. But if they are all active within the Westchester area, And if you know any young people who are interested in getting involved in climate activism, specifically more on the policy side, feel free to share this document with them, and they can check out all the different resources there are out there to get involved in more of the organizing side of things outside of just their schools.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. And also I meant 4:45, not 2:45. That's backtracking, or we're going 22 hours into the future. So our next question will be for Mr. Joe Carbon. Joe, environmental science is not a requirement for students to graduate with a high school diploma, with many school districts not even offering the subject as an advanced placement course. What educational resources can members of the audience access to prepare themselves for adapting to changing climate locally and to support our international commitments?
Thank you for the question, Paul, and thank you, everybody. Westchester Greene County, USA is a terrific resource that helps students think globally and act locally and take concrete action, as I explained. But first, I want to thank the UNA for organizing today's conference. I want to wish the UN a happy birthday. There can be no doubt that the UN has made numerous important contributions to our global community over the last 76 years. I'm the founder and executive director of One World, an educational enrichment program that aims to build the kind of global competence we're going to need to solve the major problems facing humanity today. There can be no doubt that none of the big challenges facing us, AI, nuclear proliferation, and climate change, the problem we're discussing today, can be solved by any single nation state. We desperately need a strong UN. Now, I would argue the success or failure of globally minded organizations like the UN are going to determine our fate as a species. Indeed, for the first time in history, the UN provided humanity with a roadmap that not only endeavors to solve the climate change problem, but also brings into poverty and hunger. The 17 interconnected sustainable development goals outlined by the UN have the power to transform our world. These goals set wonderful, unprecedented targets for humanity. I'll never forget presenting to 300 students at an elementary school. When I asked a student of 8 years old, how old are you going to be in 2030? And he said, I'll be 18. I said, what would the world look like if there was no poverty, hunger, and we'd solve climate change? He said, of course, it would look beautifully. But my aha moment occurred when I said, what can we do together to make this happen? What can the 300 of us people do in this room? How can we come together to make it happen? And that is a tremendous resource and asset the UN has given us. In terms of climate change, we've been working with the UN over the course of the last 5 years to help schools become carbon neutral, not in 2050, but today. And let me be clear, I've never had a better partner than the UNFCCC in my 4 decades of work experience. So much so that 2 Saturdays ago on October 9th, we organized a Pan-Westchester Climate Change Conference for Westchester youth under the theme, Think Global and Act Local, with the goal of supporting a youth-led group to provide the educational and action-based resource that seems to be missing. Indeed, we are thrilled to bring global partners like the UNFCCC, Let's Go Zero, together local public officials as County Executive Latimer, Sustainability Officer Peter McCart, who I understand is here today, and State Senator Shelley Mayer. Together, we encourage every school in Westchester to sign a dual pledge that commits them to become carbon neutral today and net zero by 2030. Imagine the message. Imagine the message it sends to the world if every school in Westchester becomes carbon neutral today and reaches that aspirational commitment of net zero by 2030. Imagine the message it sends if every environmental club in Westchester shares best practice across the county. Solving the climate change challenge will require unprecedented levels of cooperation at both the global and local levels. My hope at One World is that by bringing together committed youth like Paul and Caitlin, we can help Westchester become recognized as Greene County, USA. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. What you're doing really embodies the United Nations Association's motto of think globally, act locally, and you do have our support so that we could become Greene County, USA, or the Green Apple of New York State. Our next question will be, Caitlin, I'll have you answer it first. Is climate change an issue that will impact all humans regardless of their cultural background or socioeconomic status in society? What is one thing that anyone in the audience can do locally to help address this global issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for my answer, I would say there is not only one solution to the climate crisis, because it is a fundamentally intersectional issue. It touches all aspects of our society. And if you haven't gotten that impression from the other panelists, I'm putting it here very clear. And so I think the one thing, if you're going to name anyone can do to help to address the issue, is find what they're passionate about and find how that connects to climate, because I guarantee you it does. I have another link to put in the chat. What a shocker. That's actually to a podcast episode. If you haven't listened to How to Save a Planet, it's a wonderful podcast. It's by Kimla Studios. I'm a big podcast person myself. But at the end of this podcast, put the link in the chat, they go over a Venn diagram that they encourage their listeners to make, that has an intersection between, you list out what are you good at in one bubble, another one that's what is the work that needs doing, and then another one is what brings you joy. And then at the intersection of that, right, you find your role in the climate movement. So like if I was going to do that, just as an example, what am I good at? That's a hard one to talk about. I'm just going to say writing. I can write pretty well, right? What's the work that needs doing? I'm going to put, there needs to be lots of state policy. New York state policies need to be passed that helps to meet our New York state climate goals. And what brings me joy? Working with other passionate individuals. So what can I do? As a result of those, I could write op-eds about climate legislation, right? I could help prepare speeches for events like this about climate legislation. And then that's my little niche. So if there's one thing that anyone could do to help to address the issue is listen to that episode, fill out that diagram, or just go to that episode to find the instructions for the diagram and find what is the perfect place for you within the climate movement to make action happen. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I might have to head out early because I have to catch a train. But this event has been amazing. And I think all of the organizers, you are all amazing people, and I'm honored to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us, Caitlin. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So our same question will go for you, Joe. What is one thing anyone could do locally to help address this global issue of climate change?
Well, look, I think Caitlin's 100% right. It's a complex issue that requires unprecedented levels of collaboration, both locally and across the globe. Economist Jeffrey Sachs tells us that we share a common fate on a crowded planet. At One World, we wholeheartedly agree with that view, which is why we're so honored to participate in this conference that celebrates the UN's 76th birthday. Clearly, climate change is at the forefront of the challenges facing humanity today. The UN has set a 30-year goal to become net zero by the year 2050. That's going to be one of the defining challenges of our life and certainly our youth's lifetime. The good news is that unlike nuclear proliferation or artificial intelligence, all of us can come together, as we've been hearing today, to begin to design solutions. So first, as mentioned above, we created Westchester, Greene County, USA, to encourage students to think globally and act locally. And we're asking every school in Westchester to sign the Westchester Greene County Dual Pledge, such that Westchester schools become carbon neutral today, working with the UN, and net zero in 2030, working with UK Climate Change Champion. In addition to the dual pledge, we're asking Westchester environmental clubs to come together, share what they're doing so we can begin to identify who's in the room. What are they doing? With a view towards developing best practice can be applied across the county. Paul, you organized a fantastic conference with sustainable development on April 1st of this year, where every club came to present. We're stealing your ideas and trying to bring schools across Westchester together. And our hope is that Westchester youth can become among the most eco-literate and eco-collaborative in the world today. Our hope is that we can become a model for New York State and eventually the rest of the United States. Indeed, our efforts to unlock the power of the education sector to be a force for climate change received a big vote of confidence from President Obama's former Secretary of Education, John B. King, who launched a K-12 action plan calling on the nation's 100,000 public schools to begin to mitigate their carbon footprint. They explained that these schools serve 7 billion meals each year, generating 500,000 tons of waste. We just heard from Superintendent Ritchie how he reduced waste at his school. In addition, they operate the largest mass transit fleet in the country with 480,000 buses. Finally, in addition to asking students and educators to encourage your schools to design the dual pledge, we're also asking students in Portchester to take the dual pledge home, encouraging their families and households to become carbon neutral at home and eventually net zero. And in order to incentivize Portchester students, we're asking them to enroll in a global effort led by Prince William called Generation Earthshot. The Earthshot Prize is a prestigious global environmental prize designed to incentivize change and help repair our planet over the next 10 years. It aims to inspire children and young people to join in this mission by nurturing the innate creativity of young people and then channeling it towards solving our environmental problems. It's exactly these kinds of endeavors, bringing students together across Westchester and across the globe, that we're trying to do at One World. And that Westchester Green County, USA is a fantastic example. Again, I want to thank County Executive Latimer, Westchester County Sustainability Officers McCourt, and State Senator Shelley Muir for their vision and cooperation and working with global leaders like the United Nations and the UK Climate Change Champion. I think it's this kind of collaboration that we're going to need in order to solve these kind of complex problems.
Thank you so much, Joe. Since Caitlin's not able to join us for the Q&A section due to time of the commitments, we're going to have you answer just two questions that came to me through the chat. The first one is, Americans often use their pocketbooks to express their views. What are some purchasing changes? What purchasing changes would you recommend to individuals to consider to fight back against climate change?
Great question, and a great power. Green power is infinite. First thing is what you eat, right? What you eat, we heard earlier today, what you eat, ultimately, I talked about basically taking the dual pledge at home. Our educator in Wales did that. So he basically became carbon neutral at home, and then he became vegan. And he ultimately stopped eating meat. And that's a terrific signal to send. In addition, obviously, you want to buy local as much as possible and use your green power. And I think there's an opportunity to organize across borders to use green power, because ultimately, look, red meat is clearly an environmental challenge with methane gas. Imagine if everybody stopped eating red meat in the world today. Imagine the impact.
Thank you, Joe. Second and last question. There are water companies like Poland Springs who sell water coolers. How can the county make a discount deal with these companies and offer that as an alternative for consumers in their homes or small businesses, instead of buying water bottles, which only a small percentage is recycled?
You know, that's a great question. Again, I don't know if Peter McCart's still here. He'd probably have a better answer than I would, but certainly, again, you know, I'm brainstorming now here, but why not at school encourage your schools to purchase en masse, right, with bigger tanks, and everybody bring their water bottle to school, so you eliminate the plastic bottles. A number of schools are really working to eliminate plastics in the schools, and I think that would be an opportunity. And again, Sustainable Westchester's done a terrific job of coming together and purchasing electricity en masse, and maybe there's a way for us to do that with water as well.
Agreed, Joe. Thank you so much for taking time of your schedule to join us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So I'm going to give the floor now to our wonderful president, the Honorable Johanna Edwards.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you all for participating today and being involved in our program. Hopefully you were able to get more out of it than you thought you would have been able to. All right. But the thing is, what we must do is come together as a unit. We can't leave each other just because we're ending today's program, but come together as a unit to make sure that things change for the future of our children and our children's children. Again, thank you all for participating. Have a good rest of the evening.
Can I intervene here?
Sure.
I just wanted to tell everyone that we will be sending this list of resources to everybody who is here today, everybody who registered. So we'll be following up with you all. And I also wanted to mention that among the other people, and one of the ones who put in a lot of great questions was tuning in from Cape Town, South Africa. And she said she learned so much. So, and I just want to thank Peter McCart for being here. Sean Patterson Howard, Mayor of Mount Vernon, was here, and many others. So I'm just, I'm so delighted with the way the program went. Everybody was just terrific. And I think, I don't know, Paul, would you like to stay on and just continue the conversation for a few more minutes? Maybe Peter McCart would like to say something.
Yeah, I guess
And I would like to
I'll
just add before Paul goes on, I would just like to add in my ending that we don't let this be the end of the program. We must somehow come back together and utilize the power that's come to us in the last hour and a half. Okay, so look out for a message to come from us to let you know how we can. I'm sorry, I was trying to get off my video. Somehow we can come together to continue this conversation. Okay, but again, thank you so much.
Thank you
Paul,
so
sorry.
much. Yeah, no problem, Mr. President. You could cut me off anytime. I don't know if Peter McCarty's here. I don't know if he would like to say a couple of words or any.
Good.
No, but I'm not sure if it was Mayor Armacost or somebody said persistence. And persistence is key here with this. This is not going to be done overnight. It's not going to be done, I got the football game on here. I got to turn that off. Busted. So yeah, I think that's it. The county is in it. Elections have consequences. I always say that. I mean, look at Mayor Armacost and all the other great municipalities around the county and with the state and everything else. And obviously my boss, County Executive Latimer, gets it. He's always got it. He's been an environmental leader from day one. He scores the highest score. But all these other people are doing just great things too. So that's it. But I just wanted to make sure that County Legislator Shimsky gets the proper shout out that she deserves. She is also a major leader for a long, not that she's old, but she's been doing this for a long time. And we really appreciate everything. The Board of Legislators, we work really well together. We're getting a lot of things done. If I'm missing something, they pick it up and vice versa, and we work together. And it's a slow crawl, but it's happening more and more. So thank you all.
Well, Mary Jane is my legislator, so I'd love to call on her. Do you want to say a few words, Mary Jane?
Thank you very much, Marcia. Thank you for the shout out, Peter and Nikki earlier. There, as was said, there is so much that needs to be done in order to get us to the place we have to be. And it involves basically every facet of our lives. So there's a lot of innovation, a lot of organization, a lot of public education that's needed. And the important thing, to go back to one of Peter's comments, pick up the ball and keep running. And we stay active, we stay persistent, we don't take no for an answer. And we look for all of the different ways that we can impact greenhouse gas emissions and all of the other sustainability problems that we are having, because that's the big one, but it's not the only one. We'll get somewhere. So it's important for all of us to just keep working hard and working together.
Thank you, Mary Jane. And the meeting is closed, so if people want to get off, they can, but we have until 5. We can keep it open until 5. I just wanted to ask the panelists and all the presenters and the moderators whether any of you have any final comments to make. And I guess you could raise your hand. Would that work, Devron?
Yes.
Sarah?
It looks like Joe has a question.
Well, I just really wanted to thank you for organizing this. I'm not really familiar. I'm embarrassed to say I'm not very familiar with the UNA. I see my friend Ann Jeffy Holmes there, participated in this, and I just want to, and of course, thank Peter McCart for all the work he's done. I just really want to thank you for organizing this on a Sunday afternoon. I didn't know it was the 76th anniversary of the United Nations, and look, I truly believe, as I mentioned, I think the success or failure of organizations like the UN are really going to determine the fate of our species. And so I just want to say thank you.
Joe, you are obviously a big supporter of the UN, and you will be hearing from us. Your membership, you can join.
I'm ready to join. I was looking. I'll be.
We'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Nikki Armacost, would you like to say something?
I would. I want to say how incredibly inspiring it was to listen to everyone, to listen to Sarah and all the great things that are happening in New Rochelle, to hear all of the great initiatives that the schools are doing, to hear the incredible enthusiasm and energy and ideas from our young people. And it was just really so fabulous to be here this afternoon with all of you. So I just want to thank you and say that you're a massive inspiration, and really it's been a complete pleasure. So special thanks to you, Marcia, for including me, and to Brandon, who was an amazing moderator, but to everyone, really, it was fabulous to be part of this conversation.
And I'd just like to add thank you to Nikki Armacost. And we also raised the UN flag in 3 places, and I think they're still flying. One in Hastings, one in Mount Vernon with Mayor Sean Patterson Howard, and she was on this call, but I think she's had to get off, as well as in White Plains with County Executive George Latimer and Mayor Thomas Roach. So we were very happy to raise the UN flags. Next year, New Rochelle.
Definitely.
New Rochelle did it last year, but we'll do it next year.
White Plains, we had a very nice ceremony, and Joe, you might see the flag flying in White Plains, Renaissance Plaza.
And Mayor Amacross, we have a place for you in our organization as well. We're not going to leave you on the outside.
You have me. Don't worry, you have me.
Very good. Thank you.
So before we close, is there anyone else who'd like to say something? Raise your hand. Sarah, would you like to say?
Ann Jaffe Holmes.
Oh, Ann Jaffe Holmes, our co-sponsors, Ann Jaffe Holmes, Federated Conservationists of Westchester County. You're muted, Ann.
Unmute, Ann.
Very quick so that somebody else could get in, but I do want to say thank you all, because this was so inspiring. As Mayor Armacost said, these moderators, these young people, yes. I'm working with the FCWC Student Network every day, and I swear so many times I say to myself, get out of the way. They know they know where they have to go, and they're capable. They're inspired and skilled and capable of getting there. And so I was grateful to hear from Superintendent Ricca, and to see that his students in his school district are being enabled, empowered, because the school district is modeling and teaching about climate change. Other districts aren't. And that's the question, why? But this is phenomenal, and I really am grateful to all of you who organized this and all of you who spoke, and we will move forward together. And FCWC's with anyone and everyone who wants to create another student summit or conference where the students lead and we support. That's where I am. Thank you.
That's Paul. Hand it to Paul.
I would say we have such champions on this call that we can do it again, from Peter McCard. I also see Dr. Brenda Smith, the former superintendent of schools of Mount Vernon, as well as Jane Blair, who's the chair of the county's soil and water conservation board. So
fabulous.
If there's anywhere like I say all the times on my team calls, Sustainable Westchester, if there's any place I can do it, it has to be Westchester.
That's right.
And let me also mention one more time that Sustainable Westchester was one of the co-sponsors of the program today. So thanks to both Sustainable Westchester and Federated Conservationists of Westchester County. You are our great partners. So any last comments?
Marcia, Robert Larrick has his hand raised.
Okay, I don't see that, but can you spotlight him?
Robert, you'll have to be on camera to be spotlighted.
I'm on. I thought I was on this time. Does that work? There we go.
There you go.
Oh, that's why I'm not on that. Thank you.
You have 1
thank
minute.
You for a great. Thank you for a great thing. Could our kids help touch some of our more conservative groups? There's some Ridgeway Church in New Rochelle, White Plains has a Philippine pastor who might be more receptive to some of these things, and parental responsibility is a big issue for them. And they also work with a New Canaan Society national group. It's another vehicle for Westchester to be a leader with other groups for a national polarization. And isn't this a particularly good issue to bring our national community perhaps to a more supportive position, which we desperately need, and the importance of not only our children, but community and more loving families and communities and neighborhoods, and science and religion
So,
should be a sin.
Robert, thank you very much. We do need to get our religious leaders involved as well, of course, on all religions. And
creation care.
Let me just call on Brenda Smith before we close, because she's our partnerships chair. And so she's been waiting with her hand up. Brenda.
Very much, Marcia. Haley had to jump off.
Okay.
I am well aware. However, this was tremendous. And I said to her in the chat, and some of you may know that her principal passed some 3 weeks ago. A very dear friend of mine. She was principal of the STEAM Academy, Mrs. Sharon Bradley. And you saw heard the wonderful presentation that Haley did, and they are working very diligently at the STEAM Academy. And I had to say that. And thank you. This was tremendous. It really was.
And Robert, if you would organize that, Robert, and it's good seeing you. Haven't seen you live in about a year or so.
Yes, more than that.
Yes. But if you would organize that and just let us know how we can move on that, on your idea, we'd appreciate it.
And Haley is still with us, so we just want to give her Haley's still with us.
Oh, Haley, okay, very good.
And so, yes, please let the principal know what a wonderful job she did, Brenda. So any final comments? We've got to close in about 5 minutes. Any other hands raised?
Share with the superintendent, since her principal did in fact pass.
The principal passed, I'm sorry. And so you'll share with the superintendent. Yes, that's very sad. Okay. Haley, do you want to say anything more?
I just want to say thank you for having me. This has been a wonderful experience to share my thoughts, and I'm very honored that I was chosen to represent Mount Vernon City School District.
We were honored to have you, Haley.
And I spoke to the board member and told her how great you are. So it'll get back to Dr. Hamilton. So thank you, Haley, for being who you are. Thank you.
And don't forget to join UNA. And Paul is our co-chair, and Raina, and they'll get you on board. It's free for students up to 25.
Sure. Thank you.
Can I say something again? Bob Larrick, I was just reading on post-Darwinian cooperation models that we need so desperately at the UN and nationally. And isn't cooperation versus cutthroat competition, nationalism, etc., a critical issue? And don't we need new ways of education? The General Semantics Institute in New York, Lance Strait, etc., is the president there. And they do some good things. They just did something on the environment and Facebook, media ecology. How do we communicate more effectively, and relationship buildings, including with our environments, which ties into this. And don't we need new ways of understanding and working together more successfully?
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. And please just give some of those ideas and send them to Yana Edwards, our president. His email is yana@aol.com.
We have some of our partners, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, and I know Mrs. Rosemary Eller, who is the president of the Board of Education of White Plains.
Wow, welcome.
She's a member also of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And
Dr. Smith, Greater Hudson Valley Links is represented.
Yes.
Karen Smith, good evening. Hello, Marcia, good evening.
I am glad the Links is here. I'm glad AKA is here. They are our long-term partners.
And my Link sisters too, wonderful.
The Lynx has been our long-term partner. They're always bringing students to our programs. Thank you, the Lynx, and thank you, AKA. And by the way, these days, the Lynx is a national partner of UNA.
Yes, absolutely.
At the national level. So
Yes,
we
that is
really want to
correct.
get the Lynx involved. And so when Paul organizes that student conference, or Ann Jeffy Holmes and Paul organize that student conference, we have to get the Lynx right in there with us.